Hello summoners and welcome to another ProGuides video. Today we'll be discussing items that have gotten removed from League of Legends for being too OP. Item builds are what bring variety to League of Legends, but some items were just unhealthy for the state of the game for one reason or another, so they had to go. Before we get into it, today's question of the day is, what item are you happiest to see gone? I, for one, was thrilled to know I'd never have to see another Spear of SHOJIN Jax again. Let us know your answers in the comments below, but in the meantime, let's get started. Our first item on the list of forsaken items is Deathfire Grasp. I get shudders just from saying its name. Legend has it, if you say Deathfire Grasp in the mirror 3 times, the enemy LeBlanc will show up and own 100 to 0 you in exactly 0.2 seconds. The new death recap will show you. But don't worry, your mid laner will be busy farming minions and not using their missing ping. Anyway, Deathfire Grasp was this neat little item that gave 120 ability power and 10% CDR. It's not too bad, right? Except that it has an active that is a targeted ability that will do 15% of the target's maximum health. Then for the next 4 seconds, that target would take 20% more magic damage from any source. It was originally intended as a way for mages to deal with tanks, hence the percent health chunk. But it ended up just being a tool to delete squishies, or anyone for that matter. For those of you who weren't around back then, you should count yourself lucky. If you think face checking is risky now, it was even more so back then. Burst mages like LeBlanc and Veigar would pop DFG and have you deleted before you could even notice your health bar was dropping. You'd be dead in the literal blink of an eye. Of course, this eventually struck Riot as perhaps being an unfun mechanic for its victims, with not a lot of counterplay. So, it got deleted in Season 5. For this slot, we present you to an unholy trinity of items. Back in the lawless days of League of Legends when support still had to rely on passive gold income items while also having to provide all of the team's vision, we had 3 items to choose from. Well, technically there were 4 since Avarice Blade was a thing, but that one really never got a lot of love. Anyway, the 3 items were Heart of Gold, personal favorite, Philosopher's Stone, and Cage's Lucky Pick. Heart of Gold is the most significant of these, so I'll talk about that one first. Heart of Gold was a gold per 10 item that gave 200 health. It's nothing too crazy there in and of itself, but the problem arose when it became part of the build path for bruisers and tanks on the way to their items, which means non-supports were getting more gold income than they should have been getting without having to suffer for it. And when someone purchased all 3 of them, they would have massive gold income. This was an especially annoying strat that Twisted Fate players would employ with his old passive, which would also give him gold. So he'd basically just be rolling in dough to buy items with. As for Cage's Lucky Pick and Philosopher's Stone, they were fine items by themselves, but they were later reworked into Spellthief's Edge and Ancient Coin respectively. Although Ancient Coin was deleted from the game last year in patch 9.23, Heart of Gold, on the other hand, was not long for this world and got deleted in Season 1. Banner of Command is perhaps the closest thing to being innocent on this list, but nonetheless, during its problematic era, it was very problematic. Banner was an item that gave its owner 125% base health regen, 60 armor, and 30 magic resistance. It also had the Point Runner passive, which gives movement speed around turrets, but that's less relevant than its active. Banner of Command's active ability would empower a lane minion. You couldn't do it to super minions, but that didn't really matter. For most of its existence, Banner of Command existed purely as a niche purchase for split pushers. However, in Season 8, when Riot changed how Baron buff worked, people discovered that if they used Banner of Command on a Baron-empowered siege minion, there was almost nothing the enemy could do about it. You see, when a siege minion receives the Banner buff, it got a few things. 40% reduced damage from enemy champions, 100% bonus damage against turrets, and bonus stats for its HP, armor, magic resistance, and attack damage. And when combined with the Baron buff, it increased the attack range of the siege minions. They were basically unstoppable. It was incredibly oppressive, and in longer games, people would sell an item, buy a banner, buff a minion, then sell banner again to get their item back. The empowered minions were that important. And this was the nerfed version of Banner of Command. There was an iteration of it right before this that had 70% damage reduction from all sources from champions, and then before that, it was 100% immune to magic damage, making it so if you were playing against an AP laner or magic damage dealer, you could buy this first item and just get the turret. But in patch 8.12 though, Riot removed it, stating that while it was a fun item, we would need major changes and probably wouldn't be around again in the foreseeable future. The most recent removal on this list is Spear of SHOJIN. Spear of SHOJIN was a bruiser item that came with 250 health, 60 AD, and 20% CDR. More importantly though, Spear of SHOJIN made it so that whenever its user cast their ultimate, they would gain 50% bonus attack speed, and their auto attacks would reduce their ability cooldowns by 20% of the remaining basic ability cooldowns. This basically made it so where champions like Renekton and Jax, who use their ultimates to help them pop off, would get Spear of SHOJIN and become unstoppable killing machines, pressing their buttons with the fervor of a Cassiopeia spamming ease. It enabled champions that were already formidable duelists to be even more unapproachable, and due to its horrific uses, Riot deemed it unhealthy for the game and they deleted it in patch 9.24. I'd say rest in peace, but I'm super glad that this item is gone. Alright, our next item up is Feral. Excuse me. Okay, I can do this. Feral Flare was a jungle item back in Season 4. It was introduced as an evolution of Wriggle's Lantern to help farming junglers be more relevant, but it turned into an absolute blight on the meta. Its base stats were a humble 30% attack speed and 12 attack damage, but its passive would collect stacks anytime its user got a kill, assist, or had slain a large monster. And at 30 stacks, Wriggle's Lantern would transform into Feral Flare, and its user's basic attacks would deal 25 plus 1 per stack magic damage per auto attack, as well as healing them for 10 health. On top of that, you could ward with it, which was pretty significant since trinkets weren't quite a thing yet, was that heavy auto-attacking farm junglers like Master Yi, Warwick, and Udyr were infinitely scaling killing machines. You wouldn't see your jungler at all until they got those stacks, but when they finally emerged, they'd be ready to tear apart the enemy team limb from limb. This ran rampant for almost a full season, but Riot finally got rid of it at the end of Season 4. Unfortunately, it was replaced by the Devourer enchant, which basically did the same thing, but hey, that got deleted too, so the realm was at peace once more. Sword of the Occult. This one is a little bit easier to explain, but somehow much more controversial. Sword of the Occult was basically just the AD version of Mejai's. At the end of its life, it started with 5 stacks, but the item would grant 5 AD per stack to a maximum of 20 stacks for 100 AD. Additionally, at 20 stacks, the user would also gain 20% attack speed. This item was understandably popular on AD assassins like Rengar or Talon who could snowball kills efficiently. Riot initially said they wanted to rework the item, but they instead opted to simply get rid of it in patch 5.22. This decision rubbed many players the wrong way since Mejai's was staying. And after all, why do mages get to snowball but the AD champions don't? People still miss the item to this day. And who knows, maybe Riot will eventually spit out a more updated version of it. The honorable mention here is to Leviathan, the tank equivalent of Mejai's. That bad boy gave 32 health per stack up to 20 stacks, and when you hit 20 stacks, you just took 15% less damage from all sources. Luckily, Riot removed that one pretty early into League's existence, and most people don't even know it existed. Elixir of Fortitude was a consumable potion that, in its first rendition, would grant the user 500 bonus health and 20 attack damage. Elixirs are generally meant as a way for a champion to get a small burst of power during opportune moments, or in the late game when they're full build. Elixir of Fortitude, on the other hand, was a bit too stat heavy for its 250 gold price tag, which meant that a lot of champions just started defaulting to it as a safe option to have a stronger laning phase. And in fact, it was a little bit too strong. Riven players in particular would take Elixir of Fortitude at level 1, and due to the stats it gave, they could flash onto their enemies, auto-Q, and they'd be dead, no questions asked. Over time, Riot nerfed Elixir of Fortitude by giving it scaling stats instead of flat stats, and then increasing the purchase price so that if people wanted that risky all-in start, they'd have to really pay for it. Elixir of Fortitude stuck around for a few seasons, but ultimately it was removed in patch 4.20, and that is super dank. Our next item on the list is Will of the Ancients. Will of the Ancients was a mage item that gave 80 ability power and 10% CDR. What it also did, however, was give its user 20% spell vamp, which was the mage equivalent of lifesteal back before Riot deleted the entire mechanic from the game. As I said, spell vamp was basically just a way to let mages heal off the damage their spells were dealing to offer them some sustain. However, with the way spell vamp functioned, it was kind of an all or nothing item. Champions would need to have pretty high base damage or item damage to make Will of the Ancients efficient, but when they could use it, they were basically unkillable. Rumbles and Vladimirs used to build this item and become even harder to deal with than they already were. Picture a late game Vlad with even more healing than he already gets. Doesn't sound like a good time, does it? Eventually, Riot moved away from spell vamp as a whole and instead gave Will of the Ancients the passive I first mentioned. And I'm only talking about one of the later iterations of Will of the Ancients. If you go back in time, really far back, Will of the Ancients actually used to give a spell vamp aura to everyone on your team. So not only you were vamping from spells, but everyone else on your team was too. And another thing is that spell vamp didn't have a fall off for AoE, much like items later where there's 1/3 effectiveness for AoE spells. And that's why Vladimir and Rumble loved it so much. They would get full value of spell vamp if they hit multiple people with their abilities. Despite the efforts from the balance team after spell vamp was removed in Season 6, there was no longer really any reason to have Will of the Ancients in the game, and its niche was somewhat filled by Hextech Gunblade. ZHONYA'S ring is one of the cooler ones on this list, and it didn't even get fully removed in the traditional sense. It's gone for sure, but that's only because it got divided up into 2 items, just like Riot had done in the past with other items like Force of Nature. ZHONYA'S ring was an item that gave 120 ability power, increased ability power by 25%, and had the active effect of stasis. Sound familiar? That's right. Down the line in Season 1, Riot split the item into 2, creating Rabadon's Deathcap and ZHONYA'S Hourglass. As it was, the item was a little bit too powerful to have both effects in one place, and Riot probably felt that it was better for the game state that people had to choose between prioritizing high damage and invincibility. There's more build diversity that way, which makes sense. For those of you who are former Twisted Treeline players, rest in peace Vile Maw, gone but not forgotten, this set of stats will seem familiar to you in the form of Wooglit's Witch Cap. Due to Treeline's more condensed nature, the item concept was deemed appropriate and allowed to continue existing under another name with slightly different tuning. Tracker's Knife was a jungle item released alongside the jungle items we know today. Rather than augmenting your smite, however, it gave junglers extra wards to carry around with them. Now obviously this was good for Lee Sin, who needs to ward hop, but what about everyone else? What's so OP about a ward knife? Well, unlike most items on this list, this one had nothing to do with directly harming your opponents. Instead, it got removed because it was preventing harm. In the higher levels of play, where people pay god-tier attention to the map and know exactly where to place wards and when to place wards, it was completely busted. Competitive junglers could essentially lay down enough vision alongside their supports to keep their entire team safe in the early game. There was no way for the enemy jungler to get ganks off unless the stars aligned. Riot saw how this item was completely eliminating early game action and ended up removing it in patch 8.4. I personally still miss Tracker's Knife to this day. I thought it was a really great item for my style, so I'll give a rest in peace here to the Smite Stone. Another honorable mention here is to Ranger's Trailblazer, the other jungle item that got removed. This smite upgrade came with an AoE smite that even stunned the camp that junglers used it on, giving ridiculously fast and healthy clears to champions that already had fast clears. And once you were done using it, you could actually swap it out for a minimal cost or even for free at one point to another smite. It was too strong, too OP, and deleted on patch 5.22. Before we had Lethality, we had Brutalizer, the Brutalizer. It was an AD item that at different times built into Youmuu's Ghostblade, the Black Cleaver, and the Warrior Enchant. It gave 25 AD and had an unnamed unique passive that gave 10% CDR and at one point 15 armor penetration, which was later changed to 10 flat armor penetration. And it was all for a gold cost of just 1,337. That is a ton of stats, and Brutalizer was part of what enabled AD assassins like Talon and Zed to snowball so hard so early on. What really pushed it over the edge though was that it had an unnamed unique passive, which meant the CDR and armor pen it was giving would stack with other items that it built from, like Youmuu's. This meant that champions who bought it could use it as a consolation buy early on, or even just choose to stack them and abuse the armor pen they'd received to delete squishies. As with most items that are doing too many jobs in one, Riot split the item into 2 and gave us Caulfield's Warhammer and Serrated Dirk. But don't be fooled by Riot though. They didn't actually care about Brutalizer being OP. No. They needed it for a much higher calling. They needed its icon to take on the mantle of the greatest item ever created, the stat stick of stoicism. Riot doesn't want to tell you this, but the only reason they took down Nexus Blitz as a permanent game mode is because they went too far. The stat stick was too powerful to be contained within their meager servers. Legend has it that the stat stick is just chilling on a beach in Fiji in a resort paid for by Riot so it doesn't come back to wreck their game. Stay wary, summoners. It could return at any moment. But until that day it returns, you're just gonna have to get better at the game. So that means go to ProGuides.com, get your challenger coach, and get a little bit better at the game. So when the stat stick of stoicism comes back, you are prepared. That's it for today's video. I hope you guys have a good one, and I'll see you on Summoner's Rift.